CJ's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating to take the plunge into the unknown depths lurking just a few keystrokes away. He knew delving into the dark web carried risks, yet his curiosity had grown too strong to resist any longer. It had started innocently enough. Late-night conversations with his coding buddies turned to rumors about secret sites hidden beyond regular search engines' reach. Places where anonymity reigned and regulations meant nothing. They spoke in hushed tones about finding anything from illegal goods to government documents never meant for public eyes. TJ listened with intrigue, wondering what other worlds existed beyond the surface internet. Now, alone in his cramped apartment for the weekend, while his roommates were away, opportunity had come knocking. He took a deep breath and opened Tor, feeling the familiar sense of entering a shadowy parallel of the regular web. For a while, he browsed forums, discussing privacy tools and cryptography, soaking in discussions about maintaining freedom of information. But soon, curiosity pulled him deeper into uncharted areas. Clicking random hidden service addresses, he delved into forums with no clear purpose. That's when he found it. A video playing without audio on a thread with no other context. At first, he wasn't sure what he was seeing. Two figures appeared in a dimly lit room, one bound to a chair, while the other circled with slow, methodical steps. Then, the standing figure raised an arm, and Shiji saw the glint of metal in their hand. A feeling of dread rose in his stomach as the blade descended, eliciting muffled screams from the bound person. He slammed his laptop shut, his heart pounding, trying to purge the horrific images from his mind. What kind of depraved people would document such atrocities and share them so casually? As CJ sat catching his breath, the apartment suddenly went dark. He jumped at the absence of light, cursing under his breath. Of course, a power outage had to happen now, right after exposing himself to who knows what evils lurked in that video's origins. Goosebumps rose on his arms as he listened intently for any sounds beyond his room. At first, all was silent except for the pounding of blood in his ears. Then, a faint creak echoed down the hall, like a floorboard straining under an unseen weight. CJ froze, barely daring to breathe, as his imagination ran wild with panic. Inducing scenarios, he told himself, it was just the settling of an old building in the night. But as seconds dragged by with no further noises, a terrible thought took hold. He was no longer alone in the apartment. The shadows seemed to shift and breathe as CJ sat paralyzed with fear. Every creak of the floorboards outside sent a fresh spike of adrenaline through his veins, urging him to flee while also rooting him in place. He strained his ears, discerning slow, methodical footsteps padding down the hall. Whoever, or whatever, was out there. They weren't rushing or calling out in confusion like a concerned roommate would. No, this intruder moved with purpose, as if stalking unseen prey through the darkness. CJ's laptop sat open before him, its black screen taunting with the reminder of where his curiosity had led. He knew he had to wipe his browsing history and exit out of Tor before the intruder discovered damning evidence of his activities on the dark web. But moving even an inch seemed impossible with the threat drawing ever closer. The footsteps halted outside his door, followed by a long, tense moment of silence. CJ held his breath, picturing unseen eyes peering through the crack, scanning for signs of life within. At last, the intruder continued onward down the hall, and CJ let out a shuddering exhale of relief. He seized the opportunity to scramble for his laptop, frantically mashing buttons to purge any digital tracks. But in his panic, his slicked fingers slipped, causing the computer to tumble off the bed with a resounding crash. "Shit," TJ hissed, fearing the noise had given away his position. He froze, ears straining once more as dread pooled in his stomach. Sure enough, the footsteps immediately reversed course, charging back down the hall at a run. CJ lunged for his bedside lamp, yanking the pull chain with desperation. Dusty yellow light flickered to life, banishing the shadows just in time for him to glimpse a hooded figure skid to a halt in his doorway. They stood for a suspended moment, intruder and intruded, staring one another down. CJ took in ragged jeans and scuffed boots beneath the dark hoodie, unable to make out features of the face within. A gloved hand gripped a long object that could have been a pipe or club. Finally, the intruder charged with a guttural yell. TJ dove aside, feeling air whoosh past as the makeshift weapon slashed where his head had been. He rolled to his feet, snatching his fallen laptop and bolting for the sole escape, his bedroom window. Glass shattered behind him as he vaulted over the sill into the narrow side alley. His socked feet slipped on wet pavement, sending CJ sprawling amidst shards of broken bottle. Pain lanced through his palms from the fall, but he scrambled up and ran without looking back. Emerging onto a main street, CJ glanced around frantically for signs of life. The intruder's shouts echoed from the alley, spurring him down the darkened sidewalk at a dead sprint. Up ahead, a lone car turned onto the road, its headlights twin beacons of hope. Waving his arms wildly, CJ veered into the street, directly into the car's path. Tires squealed as its driver slammed on the brakes, swerving to avoid a collision. TJ wrenched the passenger door open and threw himself inside without a word. Jesus, kid. The driver, an older man in a delivery uniform, gaped at CJ in alarm. "You trying to get yourself killed? Please, mister. You gotta help me." TJ gasped, twisting in his seat to peer out the back window. To his relief, the alley entrance stood empty. Some maniac broke into my apartment. "He's after me. We have to call the cops." The delivery man's brow furrowed with concern and confusion, but he didn't question further. Slamming his foot down on the accelerator, CJ slumped against the seat, clutching his laptop to his heaving chest as adrenaline began to ebb, leaving shaking limbs in its wake. He was safe for now, but somewhere out there in the darkness, a hooded threat still lurked. And CJ couldn't escape the nagging suspicion. He knew exactly who had come hunting him into the night. CJ sat, huddled in the back of the patrol car, clutching a shock blanket around his trembling frame. He recounted the night's events once more to the responding officers, though details grew fuzzier with each retelling as panic receded into mental exhaustion. "You're sure you didn't recognize this intruder?" asked Officer Chen, exchanging a skeptical look with her partner. "No disgruntled angry neighbor? Nothing?" CJ shook his head, mutely, too wrung out to muster fresh insistence. He knew how it must sound, a random break, and seemed far-fetched, but the hooded figure's mannerisms, the way they stalked through the dark like a phantom, stirred some elusive memory just out of reach. His mind drifted back to that disturbing video on the dark web. Could the intruder have somehow discovered CJ's online activities and come to silence him? But that didn't explain the vague sense of familiarity nagging at the edges of his consciousness. Officer Chen sighed. "All right, we'll check the apartment for clues. But I'd advise being more careful who you antagonize in the future, son." As the patrol car pulled away, CJ was left to ponder his narrow escape and the lingering questions it raised. He replayed those fragmented moments for hints, stopping when a particular detail struck him. The intruder's gait. It was not the lumbering stride of a brute, but measured, predatory steps that betrayed practiced stealth. A shiver ran down CJ's spine as realization set in. He knew of only one other who moved with such an predatory grace. Flashes of his past rose, unbidden to the surface, dragging long-buried memories into the light of present danger. It had been years since CJ last saw his older brother, Daniel, but those mannerisms were etched into the fabric of his childhood. Daniel, who even as a young teen moved through their home with the silent menace of a prowling jungle cat. Daniel, whose volatile temper was as likely to erupt in protective affection as explosive violence. Their parents' bitter divorce tore the family apart, with CJ and his mother retreating from Daniel's increasingly erratic behavior. In his youth, CJ even wondered if Daniel's actions were some misguided effort to keep their fractured family unit intact. But over the years, sporadic news reports told of Daniel spiraling deeper into the city's criminal underground. Now, it seemed, his past had come back to haunt CJ in the form of a vengeful specter, lurking in the shadows cast by his own reckless curiosity. But to what end? Daniel was always volatile, but never without reason. CJ racked his brain for any clue that could shed light on his brother's motives for the night's disturbing home invasion. As the last patrol car faded into the distance, taking with it the illusion of safety, KJ was left alone with only his troubled thoughts and the dark streets for company. Somewhere out there, a hooded threat still prowled with intent unknown, and CJ knew that to survive, he must unravel the mystery of why before Daniel's shadow caught up to him once more. CJ paced the cramped confines of his apartment like a caged animal, jumping at every creak and groan that echoed through the empty halls. The police had long since come and gone, deeming the scene undisturbed, but offering no further insight into his attacker's identity or motives. Now alone with his fears, CJ struggled to quell the panic rising in his chest. He replayed memories of Daniel for any clue, stopping when a chance encounter from their shared childhood emerged from the fog. It had been years since that fateful night. Their family first fractured, but CJ recalled it vividly. He and Daniel had been playing in the woods near their home when 8-year-old CJ stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see. Hiding behind a tree, he watched wide-eyed as his teenage brother met with a group of rough-looking older boys. At first, they seemed to simply converse in hushed tones, passing around some unseen object. But then one boy made a snide comment, and Daniel's face contorted with rage. Before CJ could process what was happening, Daniel launched at the offender with a guttural yell, tackling him to the ground. Fists flew as the others jumped into the fray, transforming the meeting into a brawl within moments. Terrified, little CJ fled through the trees as fast as his short legs could carry him. He never spoke of that night, but its implications lingered at the back of his mind all these years. Daniel had always struggled to control his temper, but that was the first time CJ witnessed the true violence, simmering just below his brother's surface. Now, as an adult, CJ wondered if that had been Daniel's introduction to the criminal underground. Maybe he got in over his head with those rough boys and spent the intervening years spiraling deeper into their world. It would explain the predatory prowess CJ witnessed during the break, in as well as Daniel's increasing absence from their lives as his crimes escalated. But that still left the pressing question. Why target CJ now, after all these years? What drove Daniel to track down his estranged brother and invade his home with clear intent to do harm? CJ racked his brain for any connection between himself and Daniel's criminal dealings that could have set this dark reunion in motion. His thoughts kept returning to that disturbing video on the dark web and the gnawing suspicion it held answers. Beyond mere shock value, CJ booted up his laptop with trembling hands, steeling himself to re-enter the shadowy corners he'd glimpsed before. If facing Daniel was the only path to uncover the truth, then CJ steeled his resolve to walk it, even if it meant confronting demons from his past. CJ sat huddled in the dark alleyway, laptop open on his knees as he scoured the depths of the dark web once more. After his close call, returning felt like tempting fate, yet staying in his unprotected apartment was untenable. At least out here, the night offered some cover amidst the looming dumpsters and graffiti, scrawled walls. He retraced his steps from that fateful night, delving deeper into the disturbing corners until finally a familiar thread caught his eye. TJ hesitated, then steadied his nerves and hit play. At first, he saw only shadows in the grainy video, but as his eyes adjusted, a sickeningly clear picture emerged. Two figures were bound and gagged, thrashing in vain as masked men in dark clothing circled with pipes and knives, toying with their prey like lions with wounded zebra. CJ's blood ran cold as one captive's hood was yanked back, revealing a face he knew all too well: his brother Daniel. His eyes were wild with fear and rage, muffled screams tearing from behind the gag. A flurry of implications bombarded CJ's mind all at once. Daniel had gotten in over his head with some depraved criminal ring, and this was their brutal message: not to cross them. But how was CJ involved? And why would Daniel come after him instead of seeking revenge on his true captors? Unless... A chilling thought took hold. What if Daniel believed CJ had been the one to leak this damning footage, exposing his humiliation to the entire dark web? It was the only scenario that explained Daniel's vengeful home invasion and subsequent manhunt. CJ racked his brain for who could have posted the video and why. A rival gang, maybe, trying to intimidate Daniel's associates. But then another memory surfaced. One of his coding friends bragging drunkenly about red pill sites on the dark web focused on exposing criminal operations. It all clicked into terrible place. Ethan, KJ's hacker friend, must have stumbled upon the video and thought it a prime target to red pill others. In his zeal to expose corruption and fight the power, he failed to consider the human lives he was endangering. And now, thanks to Ethan's carelessness, CJ was marked for death by his enraged brother. Footsteps suddenly echoed at the alley entrance, jolting CJ from his grim deductions. He slammed the laptop shut and shrank back into the shadows just as a hooded figure emerged, scanning the darkness with predatory intent. Their eyes met, and CJ's blood ran cold. It seemed Daniel had picked up his trail once more, and this time there would be no escape. CJ pressed himself into the unyielding brick, holding his breath as Daniel prowled closer. His brother's hood cast his face in shadow, but the predatory gleam in his eyes was unmistakable. For a long moment, the brothers stared one another down in the gloom. Then Daniel spoke, his voice low and ragged with barely contained fury. "I know you were behind that video, CJ. You've always been jealous of what I have." CJ shook his head vehemently. "No, Danny, it wasn't me. I only just saw it myself." Daniel let out a humorless laugh. and I'm supposed to believe that. After everything, he took another step, and TJ shrank back instinctively. Please, just listen to me. TJ pleaded. I have no reason to cross you. Let me explain what really happened. A flicker of uncertainty passed across Daniel's face. He hesitated, then gave a curt nod. TJ took a steadying breath before launching into his theory about Ethan and the dark web vigilantes. As he spoke, Daniel's scowl gradually faded into a look of weary resignation. That little punk Ethan, always sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. Should known. He sighed, running a hand over his face. I'm sorry it came to this. TJ, Daniel continued quietly. I saw red when that video started spreading. Had to make sure whoever was behind it paid. CJ nodded slowly, relief washing over him at defusing his brother's murderous intent. An uncomfortable silence fell as both processed all that had transpired between their broken family. Finally, Daniel spoke again. Look, it's dangerous for me here now. Come with me, little brother. Start over somewhere new, away from all this. He held out a hand, eyes pleading through the shadows. CJ hesitated, torn. Leaving with Daniel meant turning his back on his old life. Yet staying carried its own risks, now that he'd glimpsed the criminal underground's true depravity, as sirens wailed in the distance, closing in on the alley. He made his choice. Reaching out, CJ took his brother's hand. For better or worse, their fates were forever entwined, and perhaps together, they stood a chance of escaping the darkness for good. As the brothers melted into the night, a new chapter began. One that would see whether blood proved thicker than the secrets of their shared past.